So thank you. We're going to express our appreciation to Roseland. I think everybody needs to know that in terms of the work that it was doing, not just our community, but across our city too as well, and county, to make sure that we were protected and taken care of.
Well, one other thing that I think that we did, which was important, is that with the testing and our isolation of patients and treatment, we did not have a COVID outbreak at Roseland Hospital.
Wow. Yes.
Wow.
And that's probably one of the most important things that we should mention. Because that could have occurred. And that thing, it happened in some of the nursing homes. And most individuals are aware of it here in Illinois for sure. Multiple facilities have massive outbreaks. But because of the things we put in place and because of our aggressiveness, we were able to minimize that risk. And as a result, we did not have a COVID outbreak at the hospital. Now, why is that important? Because we didn't always have the funding. We didn't always have the financial support and so forth. But what we did do is that we utilized every resource we could. We made sure that we got about 8 ventilators from the state of Illinois. We were getting PPE equipment daily. Now, we had a reporting system which we utilized every day. So I would get a text message and some of the other staff regarding what our volume of masks, gowns, gloves, and so forth, and we would send that information back. So every day or so we're reporting. And as a result, the Department of Public Health sent us the materials that we need and some other entities. But we never ran out of the personal protective equipment.
Amen.
Thousands of PPE. And but again, it was because we utilized the resources that were available. And it was important for us to utilize that because we pulled the levers that were there and it worked. And because of that, again, we did not get an outbreak at the hospital. And that when you're underfunded, the risk of those things occurring is so high because you just don't have what's required to maintain the safety to protect the clients and the staff. But we were able to do that by utilizing what was there. So I think you have to have the right people who have the right attitude. I think that's important. People who really, absolutely patient-centered, community-centered, and understand the community, understand what the community needs, understand some of the capacities of the hospital, and as a result, we can create these quality performance processes that work once you start to understand the needs of the community. So then you're not reaching so high for things. It's easy to say we can bring you in there and create an experience where you're safe, and that's what's important. You need to feel safe, and that you can have repetitious quality work, so that if we transfer you somewhere, there should be a continuum of care, and that's important.
That speaks to compassion. You have to have the compassion, and now we want to give some time for some questions, and we would like for our nurse, Regina, if you would share some questions that you know that you have your hands on the pulse of the people, you're working with them daily, and the community, in which you share with Dr. Applewhite, if he can give some insight, some of the questions that you have that the people need to hear about as well.
Okay, thank you, Pastor.
Would you please speak loud, because we're going to...
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Dr. Applewhite. And then I guess I'm going to turn the tide a little because my questions are basically about where we are now with COVID-19.
Sure.
My first question in my review of medical charts on a daily basis, I had a patient that came in May 15, was tested for COVID, tested positive. He was asymptomatic, sent back home. He ended back up in the hospital a month later, June the 16th or 15th. He has a lot of comorbidities. He tested positive again. So I guess my question is the incubation period 14 days, or is it safe to say we don't really know since the virus is still very new to us?
Well, what can happen so that we think about that incubation period when patients first present with COVID, and let's say they test positive. So early on in the disease process, and that's assuming they've done the testing correct, they could have active disease. Now, that process where that disease is active could be anywhere between 14 to 30 days. Now, this is why you have to do various types of testing, and this is where the serology comes in, where you do the antibody test. Because if you do a nasal swab and it comes out positive, then we know the individual has COVID. But there's a particular point in time when they could be recovering from COVID, but they have this dead virus. They're still shedding the virus, but they're not symptomatic. They're asymptomatic. And you may test them in 30 days to find out, okay, you keep coming up positive, but you have no symptoms. Now, what the serology will show you, the antibody testing with the titers, will give you an idea if they've mounted an immune response. And that will give you some idea if they're getting better. But specifically in terms of that incubation period, when you want to diagnose someone with COVID, it's not just the test. Because some people can be asymptomatic and test positive, so they should have some symptoms. So if you've got, say, you've been tested on day 1, you test positive on day 30, but you're asymptomatic, we have to make a determination with that patient. Well, can you return to work? Can you return to a normal type of environment? Well, the CDC has several thoughts on that. The first thought process is that if you've tested positive and you return for a test in 10 to 14, let's say 10 days, we'd say 1. And in that 10 days, they recommend you do 2 nasal swabs within 24 hours apart. And if those 2 are negative, then that patient can return to work or return to normal activity. But some patients will continue to have these positive results and be asymptomatic. So what we do at the hospital in those cases is that we would quarantine that patient one more time. So we say, well, you tested positive for the 2nd time, we're going to quarantine you another 10 days. Well, they come back for now that 2nd or 3rd visit, and if they test positive again, now we're looking at the blood to see if there's any serology. But we're also looking at other things. You have a chest x-ray, you need to get some laboratory studies, some blood counts, you need to get some blood chemistries, because you're trying to determine is there anything else that would suggest this person is still infected. Because if the test is positive and they're asymptomatic and they've been quarantined for 30 days, this patient could probably return back to work or return back to normal activity. Now, and that's kind of how you have to look at it, because that test cannot be the sole determinant if they have this disease. But you have to go through the initial quarantine process because we recognize that you could be shedding virus early on. So the antibody titers, if they were super high, very high antibodies, IgG and IgM, that suggests the patient could be infectious, and that's why the COVID nasal swab is positive.
Great, because I think, let's see, I'll take this next question. What can you tell us about the antibody testing?
Yes.
And he's answered some of those questions already. But for example, its accuracy, who should have the antibody test? Is it being offered by the state at no cost, or do you have to pay for the antibody test?
Okay. Now that's, well, we'll start from the back and I'll work forward. Now, the state of Illinois was offering antibody tests, which are rapid tests that they were doing, and a little different than a titer. So if you get a rapid test, it just tells you that you have an antibody. It doesn't tell you how much of the antibody. Now, and that's okay, just to determine who has tested positive. That means they've had exposure. That's what that tells you. You've been exposed to the virus, and now you have this antibody in your system. If you were not exposed, you should not have it. That doesn't mean you're going to have the disease. What it does mean is that you're exposed and you might develop it. Now, 2 months ago, there was this issue that we had run out of swabs everywhere. So because we ran out of swabs, we had to determine how do you test people. And this is where Rosen found their unique spot, because we were the only person on the hospital that was doing antibody serology testing. Only one in Illinois.
You see what
I know
see
that. I
Okay,
know that.
please,
That's the
please,
test I
say that
wanted.
again, please.
Yeah, so we were 2 months ago, we were the only hospital in the state doing serologic testing, in which we would do those titers. This is what we were doing, because no one had the swabs. Because there was a lab called Quest, the company, and Quest said, we're only gonna give you 200 swabs. Well, that's not enough. And then we may not get the results back for a month, because they were so overwhelmed. But you've got thousands of people coming to test. So we had the serologies, but the serology can guide you if they've been exposed. And certain antibodies connotate an infectious state. And in those particular patients, we just follow the guidelines. They suggest you've been exposed, you may be asymptomatic, but now you're gonna be quarantined and you come back for further testing. And those guidelines were changing daily with the CDC. So it was a moving target. But there was a team of people working with me, so we were able to change and audit this thing daily. So that's the one thing that Rosen did that no one else did. They didn't have that testing.
Okay.
Then now in terms of the rapid testing, so the rapid test gives you an up or down. You have been exposed or you haven't. But without the titer, it cannot really guide you. But it does give you an idea of the total population that's been exposed to this virus. And if you have certain antibodies, in particular if it's an IgM, that tells you that this is an acute early phase where you've been exposed, versus the IgG, which is one that suggests you could have some immunity. We don't know that to be a fact at this point, but we know it's following the normal course of antibodies being produced when you've been exposed. The important thing is that you have to look at the patient, take those labs, determine what to do, and then follow the guidelines for safety. And I think that's the most important thing. But Rosen was the first hospital to start doing serologic testing in Illinois.
Yeah, I asked the question because I was offered the antibody test through my job. I took the antibody test, it came back negative, but it was a whole explanation of how it could be a false positive or false negative, and so could you speak to that?
Absolutely.
These people want to take the antibody test, but because of its inaccuracy, it was a lot of back and forth about it with CDC and and, just on the news talking about if it was a good test to take, if it was not, how reliable is the test, so.
Well, the antibody test we do at Rosen is through a company called Diazyme. And so we offer both testing, the nasal test, the swab test, which is PCR, molecular testing.
Right.
And we also do the serologic testing for the antibodies. Those antibody tests have about a 90% sensitivity and specificity. What that means, if you have a 90% or more specificity, that means that's the probability that you do not have that disease once the test is done. That's what that tells you. The test is negative, which means you should not have it. But there are cases when people can get tested early on in the disease process and you haven't mounted an immune response because it's so early. Well, in 7 to 10 days, you could start to get sick. That's what that asymptomatic phase was. You're testing people before they can respond. So you may get the antibodies and levels are low, or you might do the swab, you don't detect it, but a week later it's sick. So that's why it's important that they were trying to keep people at home to determine what to do, because we didn't know because of that asymptomatic phase. I think it was a
Yeah.
No, it's still working.
Yeah.
Okay, so the important thing is that during that asymptomatic phase, we knew patients may not have disease, but it may not manifest till a week later. Okay, so the goal at that point was to quarantine people that had symptoms, obviously, and then bring them in if they're really sick. What we're seeing now is, well, not so much now, but at least 3 to 4 weeks ago, was that those patients were then starting to show up. They stayed home for 10 days, and now they're coming in sick. And that's what we're seeing. But specifically regarding the antibody testing, there's about a 90% sensitivity and specificity with those tests. But if you don't do the titer, all you know is that you have an IgG or an IgM. Okay, and that's where it gets a little more complicated.
Yeah, so my other question, it started back.
Mosaic Harris, we'll take questions from our Vice President of the Rosen Neighborhood Organization.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. One,
You have to speak loud, please.
one banking off that question. So if you're positive, you have the antibody show that you had,
You've been exposed.
you've been exposed. What does that mean? I mean, what does that mean in terms of your health outcome? Does that mean that you're not going to get it? What does that mean?
No, what that means is that, so if you have antibodies, that means that you've been exposed to the virus. It doesn't mean that you're going to develop it. It means that your body, at some point, you're around somebody with COVID, and your body's preparing for a possible infection. Some individuals don't develop the infection because they've been exposed. So your body's just mounting an immune response, just like if you get a bee sting, you're going to develop antibodies. You get another sting, then those antibodies become active and something happens. Just like any kind of infection. So all it tells us is that you've been exposed to someone who's had COVID. If you have symptoms and you have those antibodies, then we need to quarantine you. Because it tells us is that either A, they could have done the swab and didn't detect it because the swab is only positive 70% of the time. 30% of the time is false negative, which means that you can still have it, even though you tested negative. So that's why you have to look at the patient to get the symptoms. So if you have antibodies that says that you've been exposed and you got a lot of symptoms, but your swab is negative, you could have COVID. Because remember, 30% of the time it could be falsely negative. So that's what the antibodies help us to determine where you are. But if you're asymptomatic and you have antibodies and you have no symptom, then you may not have anything at all. You've just been exposed to someone around COVID, but it wasn't enough virus to make you sick. You didn't develop the illnesses associated with it.
Another question.
One other question. On the treatment, if somebody gets it, they're hospitalized, what's the treatment?
So that's a really good question because this gets us into another discussion. Initially, the thought process was to do a lot of symptomatic treatment, which would mean IV fluids, nutrition, hydration, supportive care with rest. That was treated like a regular virus with quarantine, isolation, distancing. Well, this has evolved into a little bit more complexity now. We found that at Rosen Hospital, we looked at our number of patients who had COVID and who had died, who were exposed, and we found that we had about 35% mortality. So that means that if you had COVID and you came to Rosen Hospital, there was a 30% chance that you could die of COVID. That's what that 30% mortality, which is like a case fatality rate, told us. Now, what our CEO did at that point is he did a interview on PBS. And in that interview on PBS, he talked about this mortality, this case fatality rate being so high. And there was a medication called remdesivir that has been shown for patients who have mild to moderate disease to improve their survival. Not for patients who have multi-organ failure. Those are different patients, meaning patients who have heart disease that's failing them, they're on the ventilator, they have kidney failure. Those are different patients. But patients who have mild to moderate disease did improve. Well, anyway, after he did this talk, we were able to get remdesivir. He went on the news, he talked with PBS, and after that interview, we started receiving samples. And we didn't just receive one, we received multiple samples. So we had enough to treat. I mean, our ICU is only 10-bed ICU, and that's most likely what those patients who would receive that would be. The first batch we got were for about 15 patients, and the second batch were for 5 patients. So we had enough to treat about 20 patients at that time. So that put us in a really good position to treat patients in the community, which was very important. So remdesivir is an antiretroviral medication that's being used. Some of the other medications you've heard about has been hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Somebody talked about doxycycline. Well, most important thing is that there's been some issues or concerns about hydroxychloroquine in terms of its effectiveness. But one thing you can use also is azithromycin. Now that's a pretty good medication. You can give it IV or oral. Most people have been exposed to a Z-Pak in the past. So they may have had this medication before, so the risk of adverse effects probably have already been mitigated because they probably had it because it was so commonly prescribed, okay? So, so going forward, what we try to do is if you present with COVID and you have pneumonia, and that's because we do find now radiographic imaging that tells you specifically if you have COVID. So we can do a couple things. So we will test you by your blood and your nasal swab. We're going to get a chest x-ray. We're going to get some blood samples of CBC, CMP, which is just blood counts basically. Check your oxygen saturation and vital signs. And that's how we're going to risk stratify you. Then we're going to place you in isolation if you become positive, or if you're what we call PUI, person under investigation. We continue with the antibiotics for pneumonia and things of that nature, because again, you could have other issues also. COVID could just be one of those issues. And that's where I think we get into the health disparities. Because people forget that prior to COVID, we had other problems that was not being addressed. When COVID came, there was a shift, but you're shifting people who had nowhere else to go, and they had serious medical issues, and those issues continue to occur. They didn't change. COVID just shifted the discussion and made it more complex. So, when you send those patients home, and they've got end-stage kidney disease, heart failure, risk of pneumonia, COPD, and you're assuming it's all COVID related, then what happens is they don't get the proper care. Again, 90% of the people who had COVID were with minimal symptoms. So this is the concern, this is what happens, and when you have disparities because of access, these conditions get worse because they did not have access to the hospital. And that's what was going on. And I think COVID just uncovered that because of the pandemic. But when you're dealing with patients who are at Roseland who have serious medical problems, serious, when they come there, those patients are sick, extremely sick. So COVID just allowed us to sort of peel back the process and recognize that we have to be more diligent. We have to be more accountable for their care. We have to be more patient, because there are people who are very sick. And I think with that being said, if you understand the data and you understand the demographics, you can do good care.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I want to give opportunity to Reverend Russian. She had a question too as well tonight for you, Dr. Before we close.
Dr. Applegate, I just wanted to know, is Roseland Hospital still doing those antibody tests?
Are they still doing antibiotics?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're currently still doing, we're now doing testing from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. where we do both the antibody testing and the nasal swab testing.
Can I ask one more
Yes,
question that's
please.
very
Sister Jen,
important?
please.
Can you, I had issues with people trying to get them to go take a test. Since, since asymptomatic can be tested now, and people are saying, why should I take the test? I've already had it, or why should I take the test if I'm gonna be, in 2 more days, I can still be positive? What would you say to those people to make them
Would
go
you
get a
speak
test?
to them, Dr. please?
It's back on the rail again.
So what we're trying to do is risk stratify people, right? And we're trying to get demographics because we need to determine how this disease is distributed in the communities. Now, you need that population data, that epidemiologic data to determine where the hotspots are, right? And this is what we need to know by these zip codes that people are testing. Now, just because you're asymptomatic doesn't mean you shouldn't get tested. Now, we tested everyone who wanted to be tested. If they had, now, interesting enough, 100% of those patients said they had some symptoms. They would wait in that line and they would wait because they had some issues. Now, but what I would suggest is that for us to get demographics, and not to mention, again, there could be an asymptomatic phase. Getting tested only help you to determine how you can quarantine or not, and also if you've been exposed to people or who you might be around. You know, you may have to go to a nursing home, or you may have elderly parents or children or so forth. But the point is that you really want to get that done. I see no reason why you shouldn't. Now, but I can understand if they're asymptomatic, they don't want to test. It makes total sense. You know, who wants to have surgery if you don't need it? But the test is available. I think what we're seeing now, and I think because of the work done by the Department of Public Health, they have been able to reduce exposure by keeping the quarantine, which I think has helped this city of Chicago for sure. And I think it's continuing to do that. But I also think if people have concerns, and I would suggest they get tested. Now, if you come to the hospital, just to end that discussion, when you come to Roseland, if you meet criteria for admission to the hospital, every patient gets tested. And that's how we're able to determine on admission whether you're going to OB, whether you're going to ICU, whether you're going to the medical floor. It doesn't matter. If we admit you to that hospital, we're going to test you.
Okay.
I want to give opportunity for one more question from our Roseland neighborhood organization. Mr. Cunningham and others are calling in and want to question you have for the Roseland neighborhood. You have a question, Brother Jose.
Yes, so if you get it once, can you get it again?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the concern, and it's because we don't understand this antibody profile. So in most cases, you would think if you've been exposed, you get antibodies, it's going to cure you. Well, we don't know that. We don't have enough information. So we don't know just because you have antibodies if that confers immunity. What it tells us that you've been exposed and you mounted an immune response. We can't even say if it's an appropriate immune response, right? Because we don't know. We don't have enough. And that's why you need these population demographics to determine that. So if you have the demographics, then you can see how this disease is distributing. And then you can determine, okay, one particular thing would be nice to know is what antibody level would connotate immunity, but we don't know that yet. Now, these are things that people are testing because we are trying to figure out what level is the level to say you're immune. But the issue is, do we have any sequela, long-term effects of this? You know, because people can present with, they can have a loss of hearing, loss of taste, they can have these refractory fevers and chills, headaches. The point is that, is there going to be a phase, we have a dormant phase of this disease that could manifest later? You know, there are some viruses that do that, right? When people have chickenpox and then they don't get shingles. So these are things we don't know. Is there a long-term sequela to these things that occur? You know, we know with the flu, influenza, we know what happens with that. And most people don't have a long-term sequela with that. But we don't know with this thing. And this is why it's good to collect that data so that we can have an idea of what may occur down the line. Because, we're looking at a lot of people are researching that, but that's something that we need to determine because of this asymptomatic phase. How long have you been exposed and what is occurring in your body when you're not having these symptoms? And that's the scary part because we don't know. By the time you're having symptoms, some things could have occurred, some serious damage. And the question is, will it manifest again later in life? You know, some of the damage.
So get tested.
Yeah, I think they want everyone to get tested and just be safe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's express our appreciation to Dr. Applewhite.
Awesome. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Express our appreciation to Dr. Applewhite, and we're very, very forward to Dr. Applewhite. What we would like to have from you, we know your schedule is just extremely busy, but it's so important. This dialogue, this opportunity to share and hear directly from you in terms of what's happening in our community and what's happening in our hospital is very, very important for our community. And the more information we have, the more we're educated on the issues that and the conditions that our people are facing, and the services, having access to the services, as you know, are vital. And so if you could at least once a month, if we can get a commitment or try to ask Doctor to come to us at least once a month. The schedule's so busy, but 1 hour out of the month to take time so we can get this information out. And then also you can share with us what it is that you need from us as a community to give support for that. We know the resources are very important, and we are working collectively and collaboratively together with the organizations in Roseland, neighborhood community, and South Coalition too as well, Far South Coalition to make sure that we are working together as a team, doing teamwork to make sure that the services and the quality access for medical care is here in this community as well on the far south side. But we want to express our appreciation to you for your tremendous commitment. And then, Dr. Applewhite, I didn't know all of the particular specialties that you have, but as we prepare to close, would you please let them know some of the areas that you are qualified in, and they can understand why you're able to do and provide cutting-edge leadership at this time nationally, right here in Chicago, in the city of Chicago, where they need to understand what we have in our community, what's right here in our community, and to make sure we support that as well. Because as you stated, with Metro South Hospital being closed, if you get sick, you have to go to the emergency room, you're going to Roseland Hospital. That's where you're going. And so we need a state of the art. As you talk specifically about the needs of our community, particular needs, we need a state of the art medical center on the far south side. We can't make it over to north side or to west side to get to service at University of Chicago. We need it here. And we're thankful for your expertise, education and training, and basically your compassion that you have in your profession. Would you take a moment to share with our viewers tonight what you are, some of the areas that you specialize in?
Well, there's one thing in particular I think that's important, is that we have a Roseland Medical District.
Yes.
And that's something that I'm going to be a little bit more part of. I was just talking with our CEO of getting involved in that, and that's, I think, an appointed position. So those are some things that I think being able to become a part of is going to help to change this community. You need people from the inside, and it's who understands what's going on. Who can really give some significant feedback and data, real data, in terms of this population and what we think is required from working in the hospital. And that's one agenda I think we definitely need to clearly move forward on, to make sure that we create this medical district to be what it is, because we're going to provide a lot of resources by building those service lines. So if we put a dialysis center, if you put a pulmonary clinic, things of that nature, if you put an outpatient opiate medical clinic, which is the things that we attempt to do, substance use for adults and or mental health for adults. We create that, you're creating more opportunities, and you create a safe medical district. And that's what I think is the key for Roseland going forward, is create a safe medical district. And we have the space. It's clearly there. Now we just need to move forward with it. We've shown what can be done with a pandemic, which was incredible. Now we just need to take that and move forward with the community needs to grow. Now, in terms of my credentials, I'm the director of quality at the hospital. And I'm an internal medicine doctor. I'm specialty boarded in palliative medicine. I'm also I do a lot of vascular procedures. I have a board certification through the American Board of Vein and Lymphatic Medicine, so we do a lot of venous procedures. I'm an interpreter of arterial and vein ultrasounds. I'm also a registered sonographer, and I'm a certified nutrition support clinician. So a lot of things, and I have other things I'm doing now as we speak, so to add to that. And it's important because you need to have a diverse thought with some of these issues. Because my concern is that I don't need to own the process, I just need to be a part of it. And that's how we grow together. You know, bring other people along, show them the way, hire from within, develop the community, reach out to these other service lines, and then help to guide the hospital through the process by listening to what people are telling you. And that's what I think my role is for Roseland. And when we started with that opiate crisis, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. We saw 611 patients or so in 2019. In 2018, there were about 250 plus opiate overdoses in that community. We came in there and turned that program around completely. Now there's no talk about the opiate crisis because we put things in place. We provided a safe place for treatment. We provided medication-assisted treatment, and we also did discharge planning. So we would place people in residential facilities. So they would be there 28, 30 days, or whether it be outpatient clinics. We developed those processes with about 14 or 15, I think we have now 15 linkage agreements, they call them, where we actually link patients to a facility. So when you get treated at Roseland, there's a continuation of care. So you don't go there and start over. We rewrote the templates for treatment, okay? And when we rewrote the templates, that's how we're able to get the insurance companies, the MCOs, the managed care organizations pay for the care, which they will do if you bring the patients in and get the right information. They stated, look, we don't have a problem managing your patients, just give us the documentation so we know it's going to be effective. So those are some of the things that we've been able to address, and that's why when I speak about what the hospital can be, you know, we know that. And again, I think COVID just showed us the possibilities are immense. I mean, it's we can do whatever we want with the right people.
That's amazing.
All right, amazing.
Let us,
Amazing.
thank you. Can we give Dr. Applewhite
Yes.
for his
Yes.
ministry?
Thank
I
you.
see there all that signing in, Brother Albert and Sister Charlene Q and all of you that come in tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you to Sin. Thank you to Pastor and Dr. Applewhite for all the information you share with us concerning the Roseland Hospital, hitting in to us. And does it cost? One question is, does it cost to get tested?
At Roseland it does now, but they'll test for patients regardless. If they don't have insurance, they'll still test them.
They will test, and regardless, if you don't have insurance, you will be tested. Thank you. That's an excellent question, Q. Thank you so much. We appreciate you, Dr. Applewhite. We're not going to hold him any longer tonight. We know he's had a long day and may have to go back to the hospital. Many times at night we see each other there making rounds as well. So we don't want to hold him any longer, but we do want to express our appreciation on behalf of our church, on behalf of Allen Metropolitan Church, on behalf of the new Roseland community, Roseland Neighborhood Community Organization, and we want to express our appreciation to you.
Yes.
Thank you for coming and keep up the great work and let you know that you are being prayed for. We're praying for you. God blessing to all of you tonight. Thank you for coming and being a part and sharing with us tonight. And we know that you've been blessed by the information as we have too as well. And we thank God for you. Let us close with prayer. Is there any minds, all minds clear? Is there anything else that we thank you, Sister Regina, for taking time tonight after a hard ministry as an essential worker, taking time to come out, and Reverend Rushing for being with us and taking for us tonight, and Brother Mosaic as well. We appreciate you, and we'll get this information back to the Roseland Neighborhood Community Organization. God's blessing to you.
Thank you.
And everyone get ready. We know Friday is Juneteenth, the celebration of the freeing of the slaves. That Getting Word in Texas will be celebrated, and there'll be many different celebrations this week on this coming Friday, and we'll get all the details to you. God bless you. Let us close out with prayer. Brother Mosaic, would you come and close it out with prayer? Thank you so much. We'll close out with prayer. We appreciate it so much.
Yes. Most awesome and able God, we give you thanks, O Lord, for this moment, for bringing us together, for Dr. Applewhite, O Lord. We thank you for him and for all the treaters, O Lord, for all those who are using their medical skill to treat your people. We ask that you keep them and cover them and be a fence of protection all around them.
Hallelujah.
Bless each person under the sound of my voice. You know the concerns of our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. So bless us in our hearts and in our homes. Bless, O Lord, this pastor and the work that he's doing in the community and how he opens up the doors of his church to truly be a church in the heart of the community. We thank you, we praise you, we magnify your name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
God bless you.
God bless you.
God bless you. God bless you.